All right, welcome back to the Poor Sports Podcast. We're doing remote today.
Yeah,
kind of.
Remote. We have a remote studio that
we have a remote studio, and it's nice.
Listen, we got lots of studios, folks.
You have all the right equipment for a remote studio, and that's the most important thing. But we're doing it at my house today.
Yeah,
where there's air conditioning on this hot Tacoma day.
Yeah. Well, also to be fair, I would have forced you to come to my house and sweat, but I was coming up here to make an offer-up transaction.
And the fact that you're here after doing that that's an accomplishment.
I've survived.
You survived. Nothing weird happened. No funny business. You made your purchase and you moved on with your day.
Yes, I did go to a guy's house, because you always. How many purchases of that type have you ever made in your life? Craigslist.
Maybe like 2 or 3. Okay. Not very many. Yeah.
So the common thing now is to meet in like a crowded area, like a grocery store parking lot. Whatever.
I've seen a lot of if I'm just sitting there eating my lunch somewhere in a parking lot, you'll see 2 people roll up. Yeah. And you're like, man, I hope this goes smoothly, because if it doesn't, I am the only witness.
Yeah. I know. So I drive to this place and it's Federal Way, and I don't want to talk trash about the rough neighbor. You live in Federal Way. You live in Tacoma.
I live in Tacoma by definition.
But by Tacoman's definition, you live in Federal Way.
It's a lot like my ethnicity. I can claim either side where it benefits me. If somebody's doing an event up north that I don't want to go to, I live in Tacoma. This is a long way to go.
That's a whole different county.
Yeah, if somebody's doing something down south I don't want to go to, I live in Federal Way. Yeah, that's a long way to go.
That's good. I do like the selective ethnicity oscillation, where you can pick whatever.
I got selective ethnicity and selective geography.
Yeah,
both things
good.
Very important.
Boy, I don't know which of those is going to be the title, but I feel like ethnicity is more provocative.
Selective ethnicity. It's probably better.
Anyway, so I'm driving into Federal Way, and there's like segments of Federal Way all along the I-5 corridor. You're like, basically anything close to I-5 is a pile of shit. And then as you get closer to the water, it gets nicer.
It's very nice along the water. Yeah.
And so like Federal Way is a town that I grew up messing around. Like I would like go do stuff in Federal Way. Right. I would go to these places, man. I can't believe my parents let me do this. I would go play video games at this place called GGR. Game Revolution.
Wow.
Back when Counter-Strike was the shit.
Yeah.
And it was literally in the parking lot of, by the way, I completely hijacked the intro. You were going to do an intro.
It's okay. After you tell this story, we can set up what will be coming the rest of the show. We'll set the show for everybody.
In the parking lot, there was like a convenience store. There was like bullet holes in the like light posts. Like you could see where there was like gang violence there on a regular basis.
Sure.
And I was just playing video games there till 3 or 4 in the morning sometimes.
Yeah, that sounds like Federal Way. Federal Way is it's definitely one of those places that has slowly been gentrified.
Sure.
But still has a lot of the old Federal Way going on.
Right.
And there's a lot of stuff to do here. It still has a thriving, quote unquote, thriving mall. There's not a lot going on at the mall.
Not many malls are thriving these
days. But there are some stores there, and they've built an Amazon Fresh there. Yeah. They're building a Dick's Drive-In. So, there's things that are actually
So there's
worth
also
doing.
like an Asian district of Federal Way. And what I want to know is, do they select your ethnicity for you in that district?
The thing about, one of the things we've learned living here is that Federal Way is very, a lot of places you go, there's like good Chinese food, right?
Sure.
Like you can always go find good Chinese food. That is not the case.
Interesting.
Around here. It's very Vietnamese.
Sure.
There's a little bit of Thai, but mostly Vietnamese. It's kind of an interesting demographic. So you have a lot of restaurants that kind of cater towards that. So yeah, it's and not a lot of Japanese either.
Right.
In fact, the most popular Japanese restaurant around here, I believe, is owned by Koreans. So, which happens a lot. That happens a lot.
A lot of the best Chinese food in the Northwest is made by Japanese restaurants even.
Yeah, there is this is why you have this ethnic ambiguity.
Sure.
We can't totally blame white people for not being able to identify the right Asians, because we're just making food for everybody.
Yes.
Everybody.
Well, it's all made by Mexicans in a lot of cases. So
it often is.
We really, that is truly
I remember,
the melting pot.
When I was growing up, my paternal grandmother is Japanese, but was actually born here, but spoke Japanese.
Gotcha.
And we would go to this sushi restaurant, and like she spoke pretty good Japanese. And some of the people that worked at the sushi restaurant, they were also Japanese. They could speak to her. But one time she had to ask one of the chefs for something, or one of the cooks, and she was speaking to this guy, and he had no clue what she was saying because he only spoke Spanish.
Okay, so one of my high school friends was he was from El Salvador.
Okay.
Spoke fluent Spanish, also like fluent English. He's grew up here, but his mom's from El Salvador. Born in El Salvador. His stepdad, but like the dad that raised him was Mexican. Like a lot of Spanish spoken in his home. But I used to make fun of him. He actually would still, I think, give credit to me for one of the best roast jokes ever told to him, which is that he looked like the Cleveland Indians logo, like the Chief Wahoo. But so he was like somewhat ethnically ambiguous, and right out of high school, because he was fluent in Spanish and he was like a little metrosexual, got a job at a bank immediately as a translator, making like good money.
Yeah.
Very often people would come in and start speaking Arabic to him, like assuming for sure he was Arab and spoke Arabic.
Yeah. On those same lines, as I mentioned on podcasts past, on episodes past, during the summer I get much darker.
Yes.
And the other day I went into I can't remember where.
We're still waiting for this, by the way.
So I'm a little bit darker. I went into some restaurant and I immediately got the Spanish treatment, which happens a lot. It happens a lot because a lot of people who are Spanish speakers assume I'm one of them.
It's very funny. I guess I have like maybe I just like I had a friend. I think maybe even I talked about it on the podcast. I've talked about him recently. My friend Jamal Williams, not the former,
not the basketball player,
not the former,
or the running back.
Yeah, none of the other Jamal Williams. He was he actually passed away a couple of years ago. But what I remember about him, he was black, and
that's what you remember Eskimo about him.
He was one. He was black and Eskimo, but I always thought of him as black.
Yeah,
and he looked black. His name was Jamal, but people I would like never expect to have any kind of like, catalog of races in their mind would be like, oh yeah, that Eskimo guy or that Inuit guy. They'd say Inuit. He liked Eskimo. I don't know what the right thing is. My friend Jamal liked to be called Eskimo.
Yeah.
His like screen names on everything were Blackamo. And, but he was, yeah. So that was always interesting to me because I was like, his name is Jamal. And he just looks like a black dude to me, but people would like pick it out. Like I never. And you being Japanese, I know you. I know your last name. It's come up at some point. I know you're Japanese, so to me, you're like. I guess if it ain't white, like you're.
No, that's the thing. I am I'm an enigma to most white people.
But to me, I'm just like. I just know you're Japanese, maybe. Yeah. So it's like maybe a little bit of hindsight where I'm like, I don't understand how people don't realize Akita and how you look is Japanese.
Yeah. If you know I'm Asian, then you can probably see it in me. But luckily, around here, people are generally very tolerant. It's when I go to other parts of the country. That's the only times I've ever been asked what I was by people who have no knowledge of who I am.
Right. They have no empathy for the fact that you're being asked a question that
and it's one of those
reduces you down to like a set of
And the interesting thing about that is that like this is probably the only time that you ever feel as some sort of ethnic minority different than all the people that you know. Because white people don't ask other white people that question. Right? You don't get, if you're another white person, I assume no one's asking you what you are because they don't care.
Well, here's what I'll say is they will ask like, cause I'm the variety of white where I don't have enough of anything to like identify with any white culture.
Right.
So there are people who are like, what is your like country of origin or whatever? And it's like fucking everywhere. It's like Norway.
Yeah.
So
it's all the European countries.
Nobody's wondering, are you white? But they definitely are like, what type of white are you?
What ethnic background?
What nationality do you identify with the most?
Yeah, that's not the way that the question is phrased towards non-white people. Yeah. The way the question is phrased towards non-white people is usually something along the lines of "What are you?" or "Where are you from?" Or it's aggressive. It's usually aggressive, and I mean, I've only been asked a few times in my life. It's not that bad. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have it much worse. But it's always one of those things that you're like, why? Why do you even care? Like, what difference does it make? And then you have to think about, hey, if I answer this, I mean, it's possible that no matter how I answer it, it'll be fine. But there's also this in the back of your mind. You think, if I answer this wrong, there might be some reason for that. So it's weird. Anyway,
I will say I've never had to feel that.
Yes.
Not to get touchy-feely.
No. I mean, I rarely have to. Most people out there,
somebody told me you were Great Value Bert Kreischer talking about our podcast, and then I recently had a different person call me Great Value Bert Kreischer. So we are two Great Value Bert Kreischers.
If you combined us, I think we'd be Bert Kreischer.
Like, if you summed our weights, is that what you're saying?
No, just like took half and half.
Yeah.
I think at that point, we've got it nailed.
Okay, so what are we going to talk about?
We're gonna
by the way, the guy in this beautiful Federal Way neighborhood, black dude that came out, and I was like, wow, that's like great. I mean, it's weird as a this is the white savior shit, but I was like, that's awesome. Like because I genuinely was like, this is going to be like a boring white dude. I was also like, why is this guy selling something on OfferUp if you own this like multi-million-dollar home?
This is the thing about rich people I've noticed. Having grown up in, I grew up in Bellevue.
Sure.
So, you
grew up rich, Alex. We all get it.
Yeah, I was not rich, but if you go to these houses where they're having garage sales or estate sales and the people that own these places are rich, they're on either end of the spectrum as far as getting rid of stuff. They have no concept of value typically.
Sure.
So they're either like giving away stuff that has a lot of value, or they're asking a lot of money for stuff that has no value.
They're asking like near sticker price. For
right. Like
stuff,
all their DVDs are marked at $10, and you're like, no one's going to pay $10 for that DVD. But then at the same time, they've got like this incredible piece of art that they're like, you can have it. It's taking up space in the living room, So the concept of value for rich people is often misconstrued.
Yeah. And exactly. Well, and I think there's some value to this dude and me coming and taking this shit off of his hands and him not having to deal with it. Like,
yes.
So.
Yes, the home pickup, if you're doing an OfferUp type deal, like that's the dream. Like I wish all the stuff I wanted to get rid of here, I could put on OfferUp for sale and be like, come to my house and pick it up. But I don't want people to come to my house.
Yes,
that's a problem. And I also don't want to drive down the road to like the nearest Starbucks parking lot to pass it off to them. Laziness always wins.
This is why I when I built the podcast studio, which is now ever evolving with these fucking kids we keep having.
Yeah.
But when I first built it, I put 4 seats in there, 4 mics, ready to go. Let's have a rotating cast of guests. And now I'm like, I don't want any of these people coming to my house. There's like a handful of people I trust. Yeah. You like make the cut early. But, like people who like I know some and that I don't believe are going to come back later and steal my child from me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally get it, man. Everyone's, especially now, like if anybody really wants to get to you, they can just go on the internet and find where you live. That's not that hard to do. I don't encourage anyone to do that. Please don't do that. Yeah. But it can be done very easily. So you got to be protective of your stuff.
Can I ask some questions about this room before we?
Yeah. Let's talk about this room.
Was this decoration here before?
It was here before we moved.
Okay, I like it a lot.
I actually like it too. My wife has wanted to paint over it the entire time we've been here, but it's actually a topic of conversation because usually it's in the background of all my meetings.
So your desk is normally faced this way?
Usually this way, and then the camera's facing back here.
Yeah, it's a perfect Zoom backdrop. I think that's
everybody loves to talk about the mountain backdrop in this room. Yeah, and it clearly was designed for a kid, and that's fine. I like it.
The other nice thing about Zoom, or about a backdrop in this house and the type of house that it is you have like a full wall where I have these. It always looks like we're recording in an attic because it used to be an attic and now it's a bedroom. Yeah.
It's definitely shaped.
Attic. Yeah,
it's got the shape of an attic for sure.
I do think we'll talk off the pod, but I think it's gonna. Podcast studio's going in the garage with some air conditioning in the garage. So,
oh wow, okay,
yeah, it's gonna. I think it's happening.
The move of the podcast studio has been a long-running topic. Yes, so we'll see where it ends up. Okay, let's set the show.
It could end up in Federal Way. We never know.
All right, if you've stayed through this extended intro, thank you. We got a lot to talk about. Again, it's another big week in sports, especially in golf, the golf world.
Yes.
The LIV Tour and the PGA Tour have merged, kind of. We'll talk about that a little bit. Isaiah Rodgers is being investigated for gambling. Now, this is a trend in the NFL these days.
Yes.
All these guys seem to be getting into gambling, but they don't know that they are not supposed to do that.
Yes, apparently.
So we'll talk about that. Madden is being released. Josh Allen's on the cover. We'll touch on that. We've got a pitcher, a big name pitcher who got Tommy John surgery and will be lost for quite some time. And we have to touch on some passings. There is one significant passing in the sports world this week. It actually
sports/comedy world, by the way.
Yes, I would agree that he is both those things. So we'll talk about that. We got some local topics, of course. The Mariners always keep us busy, and then we got to finish up with our home run game. I think I actually have a good one for you today. I don't know if it's going to be easy or tough for you, but on the theme of former Mariners, I found a good former Mariner, I feel like.
All right. Well, we have a tally that we'll talk about when the time comes. We have a tally where the score is at, and boy, last week was crushing. We might have we don't actually have the spreadsheet, but we've got a loyal listener, maybe my biggest fan, including my wife. In that category has compiled the numbers and has also, by the way, in his honor, I'm going to challenge you with his suggestion for the home run game.
Okay. Yeah, I've been getting some suggestions for the home run game as well.
Listen, stop crowdsourcing for the fucking champion, okay? Folks, stop it. You don't need to crowdsource for Alex, okay?
People like the home run game, man. Like, people really like the home run game.
It was smart of us to put it at the very end. So
it is good.
I wonder how many people fast forward.
The people who actually listen to this podcast and manage to stick through to the home run game, thank you.
Yes.
That's
you're a heroic person.
You are the 1%, and we appreciate it.
And then we have one local debate to talk about, by the way, which I did put together in old school as though I was about to write a blog post about it form.
Wow.
But without the burden of having to write a blog post, edit a blog post, receive criticism from people who know nothing on a blog post.
Yeah.
I've compiled some information to wage an argument for some stuff about the Mariners, basically.
Okay.
All right.
We'll get to that.
All right.
What do you got going on this week? You've got, I know you got some shows coming up.
I do have some shows. I actually have a couple of weeks. So I don't know. It's possible. So the new Tacoma Comedy Club opened last weekend, and I did a guest spot the first show. Embarrassingly, I asked for 10 minutes because I thought I could fit this chunk of material I'm working on into 10 minutes.
Oh, boy.
There's no light in the club right now to tell you when to get off stage. I didn't see people showing me their cell phones. I did 14 minutes. I looked down at my clock.
Okay, that's not so bad.
I timed myself on stage. I looked down at my clock at 6:30, and I was like, I think I'm at the point in the joke where I can fit it all into the next 3.5 minutes. Dead wrong. 7 minutes later, I get off stage. Yeah. Very embarrassing. I was getting shit for it all night, and I'm a person who's very, very diligent about doing my time, filling my time, and also not overdoing it. So,
sure.
So this is to me like a huge blow to my ego.
You did go 40% over.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a significant amount. Yeah. In minutes wise, 4 minutes doesn't seem so bad.
Right.
But when it's 40%.
Yes. Well, and also it's like
the
host did 12-ish. I did 14. The feature's doing 25, and then the headliner is a guy who's working on a bunch of new material. Call him Moulton. He's not the headliner this week, but last weekend.
Yeah. He
was doing 60 plus.
Oh wow.
And it's day one of the club. There's challenges that any new business faces when they open, right?
Sure.
And they're also it's hot. There's a lot of people in this small space.
You're really selling me on the show that I'm coming to.
All these things will be ironed out. And in fact, I did a show there the next night, and most of the stuff was ironed out by the next show. It's just, in fact, I actually worked at the Fort Wayne club that the same company opened on opening weekend. And this was a significantly smoother opening. It's going to be great by the time you get there. But there's all this stuff going on, and I took up 5 extra minutes. I forced people to essentially stay in that setting for 5 extra minutes.
Did the show end up going long then, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't all me, but yes,
Sure.
the show.
See, I don't mind. As an audience member,
yeah,
everyone would appreciate that. I think. I mean, there's some people who want to get in and out. I'm sure.
From the club's perspective, a lot of times, well, especially if the headliner goes long, they will do last call at some point in the headliner set.
Right.
So then every moment after that, the club's not making any more money.
Right.
And so that's one of the gripes with it. It's also just like, it was uncourteous. I fucked up. I felt bad about it. I also I was doing well, but it wasn't, I was like, they actually offered me 7 and they were like, unless you have something you want to work on. And I was like, yeah, if I could do 10, I would love that. And then I did double the time I was
double
offered.
the offer.
Yeah. So
that's how you take. That's how you take from these people.
So June 25th, though, I have a couple shows in. I have a show at an arcade in Des Moines on Thursday.
Wow.
Okay, and then a place in, I think it's called Hannah's in Olympia on Monday, and then Spud's Pizza in Tacoma on Tuesday. It's a run of shows with this thing called the Open Mic Collective.
Okay.
And I'm closing out all these shows, and I will be testing some new material and bombing it, almost certainly.
Testing is, you got to test in certain places. And what better place than an arcade?
Yes.
You know? People should generally be happy there, I would think.
Yeah. And they do shows, I think, weekly or monthly. Or some of them, I think these are all weekly, and then I'm doing another one of their shows in August that's monthly.
Okay.
And then June 16th, I'm opening for Josh Blue at the Capitol Theater in Olympia, which is a 1,500 seat venue, and if it sells out, that'll be the largest crowd I've ever.
You better bring your merch for that one.
Yes, I ordered new merch for that one.
Yeah, that seems like a big one. Okay, cool.
And then I am June 16th also Bickerson's Brewhouse. I won't be there. I have a cast of Josh Firestein is headlining.
Oh,
Lynette
nice.
Manning
That's
is
a good
featuring.
one.
She's great, and then my buddy Alex Kaufman, who's past podcast guest of this of my podcast, Nobody Likes Casey McLean, not this podcast.
Yeah.
You'll never be on this, Alex Kaufman. You'll never be on this.
We
podcast.
already have one Alex.
we
don't
have any
need
more
2.
Alexes. But that's June 16th also, Bickerson's Brewhouse.
Yep.
And then after June 25th, I think I'm done. I'm not going to schedule anything now. I won't commit to anything because my wife's due July 13th.
Right.
We just did the walkthrough of the birthing center yesterday. It's all becoming real. I'm remembering everything about being a brand new dad that sucks right now. I'm pulling stuff out of the garage and it's like, oh, fuck. Bottles, cleaning bottles every day. There's so much.
That's going to be me in a couple months.
Yes.
But right now we're going through this process of clearing everything out. Originally,
Sure.
this was going to be our nursery with the nice mountain backdrop here.
Mm-hmm.
But we ultimately decided this room's a little bit bigger than one of our other guest bedrooms. So we're going
Gotcha.
to move it over there because turns out babies don't need a ton of space. They just
Yeah.
need enough to get by.
Do you have plans for how long the baby's going to sleep in your room?
We don't have any definitive timeline, but we know it'll probably be a few months.
Gotcha.
That's kind of how it goes. And then we'll just have everything ready for when the time comes. So yeah, it's just a lot of, it's the ultimate housing projects right now. Everything's getting done.
Yeah.
Very, very long, laborious weekends. That is when you really know you're an adult. I know a lot of people think, you just buy a house and now you're an adult. That's like step 1.
Sure.
Step 2 is when you decide you're going to bring young people into it, children into it. Then all of a sudden you kick it up a notch.
It definitely blasts forward your adulthood. And it also, the stakes of everything increase.
I totally get it. The other thing I don't know is how you could possibly have a kid and live in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Oh,
boy,
dude.
that would be, I don't envy anybody in that position.
When you have a kid, I think you'll probably both go through this, but you think about how many, mostly women, raise a brand new child on their own.
Oh yeah. Dude,
And
single parents, man.
Yeah, and in oftentimes in New York or LA or very expensive cities to live in where, you're living in a studio or 1-bedroom apartment and I just don't even know. I don't know how you could have a job. I don't know how you could work. I don't know how you could have a life. I don't know what, like everything would be incredibly difficult because very often those people aren't like super affluent. You know, occasionally there's like a girl boss that intentionally goes to a sperm bank and becomes a parent on her own. That's rarely the reason people become single parents.
Right.
And most of the time the circumstances are difficult. And I just can't imagine going through it. I could not do it myself.
No, I
would give up my child. I would send her. She would go fight in Ukraine.
Or you put it to work real quick.
Yeah, that's right.
We're gonna need money out of you right away.
Now, child
right
actor.
now. Yeah. So we're just getting ready for that, man. It's a couple months away now, but it feels like it's getting closer every day. I mean, every time I get high now and have an edible, I'm like, getting close. This might be one of the last times,
dude.
And then I start thinking about what it'll be like. Okay, the problem is anytime I have an edible, I immediately start thinking about how crazy it's going to be to have a child.
Have we explained? We know you have a crippling alcohol addiction, but have we explained your drug addiction on this podcast? Your horrifying drug addiction.
The two things I like to do are occasionally have a glass of sparkling wine and then occasionally have an edible. Yes.
Well, also, by the way, we also have like measured this podcast in bottles of whiskey consumed. So
that's true. We've really slowed down. We went really hard out of the gate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
well, we were doing them at night.
And
also, I have this thing now that I'm sure you'll have, and you're saying it, I think, with the edible thing, where it's like every night when I get like, anytime I reach the point where I'm like, I probably shouldn't be driving. Like on the first night of Tacoma Comedy Club, of the new Tacoma Comedy Club, I left my car behind the club with their permission.
How far are you from the new location?
It's like 2 miles.
Okay, it's far enough. I was going to say, like, I generally have an idea of that neighborhood, but I wasn't sure if it was close where like you could walk. I mean, you could walk if you had to, but why would you?
I would. So one, I had like a bunch of camera stuff that I didn't want to walk with. Two, I will walk it at some point. I don't mind walking. I walk more than you would expect for someone of my size, you know. There's a great Louis C.K. joke where he's like, I run 5 miles every other day just to maintain this shit body. And that's why I'll walk a lot of places. But it was like, you know, midnight and I needed to wake up early in the morning and all that.
Yeah. And I know, I mean, that's kind of a bar district walking around. I guess there's probably a lot of people out there.
Where this is though, is like a little out of the bar district.
Okay.
It's it's like, I mean, it's too, like I live nondescript distance from the bar district. I live, you know, within
we've talked about how you can
between 0 and 25 miles from the bar district. Okay,
yeah, we've talked about how we
give it out, Alex. If one of you shows up to my house, I'm giving you Alex's address.
Smashing bottles, screaming. You live close enough.
There's a guy moaning. There was a guy moaning in my neighborhood for like, I don't know. I came out 4 hours later and he was still doing it. I'm not quite sure.
Was it sad moaning or happy moaning?
No, it wasn't. It didn't seem like there was an ejaculation imminent, you know?
If it was building up.
Yeah, that's quite tantric. But he anyways, so I took that Uber home, but when I took it, I was like, "Oh, what if my wife went into labor like last night or tonight, like right now?" We're going to get in an Uber to go to the hospital, which isn't even that bad of an idea. I might owe the Uber.
I thought about that too. I'm like, well, like while in the midst of my edible state.
Sure.
I'm like, what if something happened right this minute?
See, this is why I can't consume marijuana because I worry about everything. That would crumble me. It would ruin me.
Also, it just heightens the paranoia in that moment. So, not ideal. All right, let's get into some of these topics, shall we? Where would you like to start today?
I think we could start at the Isaiah Rodgers thing because I do want to talk about the LIV-PGA thing, but this gambling situation is interesting to me because so the big one last year, Calvin Ridley got suspended for the season. There were 3 Detroit Lions, including second-year receiver Jameson Williams.
As a Jameson Williams fantasy owner, this is terrible, terrible news. And if you know anything about fantasy sports, when a guy gets suspended, that is not the same as him being on injured reserve. Yes. You cannot throw him into your injured reserve. Yeah. We need a suspension spot.
Yeah.
A suspension reserve spot in fantasy sports.
Does the team lose a roster spot if they have a player that's suspended?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they might lose one on like the larger roster, but not like the 53-man game day or anything. I don't know for sure, though.
So, so this is just another guy, Isaiah Rodgers. Nothing about Isaiah Rodgers in particular, but it's interesting to me. My wonder is, so gambling has become much more trackable. It used to be you'd have to talk to some bookie that also sells Alex drugs and alcohol that specializes in edibles and sparkling wine. You'd have to talk to a criminal in order to gamble, and so there wasn't a paper trail. There'd be this cash transaction. So my assumption is, based on how many of these guys are getting caught because they're leaving a paper trail on something like FanDuel or something like that, this has to just have been going on forever, and we're just now starting to run into these situations because... Do you think that? I mean, I know you have some inside information. I assume that the folks that you know don't give you a lot of stuff about, like, who's gambling or if they're gambling.
I mean, the big issue with these gaming like crackdowns over the last few, I guess, couple years now is that, like you said, I mean, a lot of this is being tracked on their phones now.
Right.
So it's like they're using some sort of betting app to bet on games, which they're not supposed to do. And that raises all sorts of questions. Like, if they're tracking this sort of thing, if they're tracking their gambling on their phone, what else are they possibly tracking that they maybe should or shouldn't? I mean, it's a huge gray area. And
do you think that this is because the NFL is tracking their phones, or do you think it's because, like, there's some anonymous tip or some accidental slip up and they've discovered that these guys are using FanDuel? Do you know what I mean? Like,
I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows for sure right now. I'm sure there's a lot of speculation out there. I mean, these stories are not like incredibly salacious, so there's not a ton of like investigation into them. I think if you see more and more of these pop up, maybe there will start to be a little bit more of an investigation. But, you know, over the last couple months, as people have become suspended for this, is, you know, a lot of the fan reaction is that it's very hypocritical.
Sure.
The NFL and all these sports leagues are really kind of getting into bed with gambling as a whole. I mean, they're encouraging it. You can't watch any sort of game now without seeing tons of gambling ads. Whether
but this isn't new though. Like so boxing has a history of corruption based on stuff like this, about like guys throwing fights, guys. I mean, actually, combat sports, a lot of times the guys do end up placing bets on themselves, which is crazy that that's allowed.
Yeah.
But it's like that as like as a conflict of interest, being considered a conflict of interest by whatever governing body, the league, the promotion, the like division of boxing or whatever. That's not new. I think what's new is the like low stakes of this.
Yeah, I mean, if you're placing a bet on football and it's a couple $100 and it's not your team or something like that, it seems silly that someone should get suspended for that. But, you know, it's kind of like insider trading with stocks.
Yeah.
It's like, even if it's not your team, you certainly know a lot more about the NFL and the teams throughout the league. You probably have friends on some of those teams. You know more than the average person would, and that's going to give you an edge, whether you know it or not. Whether you're conscious of that edge or not, you certainly have it.
I actually think the fact that the NFL is in bed with these gambling companies makes it less hypocritical, because they're not saying don't gamble, but they're saying don't gamble on this product. We're all making more money because of this gambling stuff. And one, don't fuck it up for everyone. But two is the integrity. That stuff becomes a lot less attractive if Tim Donaghy or if some huge gambling scandal exists.
Yeah.
And that's like, are they hypocritical in one way because they're like, they regulate it slightly while also promoting it?
Yeah.
Kind of. But I don't think they're not saying don't use FanDuel. They're just saying don't gamble on football.
Right. I mean, I think the big issue is that you can't gamble on your own sport.
Right.
Which we know has always been a thing since Pete Rose basically got banned from baseball. Since you could even go back to 1919 when the Chicago White Sox got banned for betting on the World Series, essentially throwing the World Series.
Sure.
There is a difference. The thing, with the Chicago White Sox scandal of 100 or so years ago, they were basically throwing games, right? Pete Rose was often betting on his team to win, which is like, that's much harder to do. In some ways, you're actually kind of doing the gamblers a favor.
One, they don't actually know which games you are and are not betting on.
Right.
But two, I think that the impropriety with Pete Rose, I've heard that argument before, but it's like, if he's got $100,000 on this game, is he going to all of a sudden start like unloading the bullpen?
Right. He's going to manage like it's Game 7 of the World Series if he's got money riding on it. Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, there's always implications with betting on your own sport, and now you kind of have this added wrinkle of like various mobile apps you can use to bet. Now, if these guys had just been like walking into a casino sports book, throwing down $1,000 in cash and getting a betting ticket the old school way, they probably don't get tracked. I mean, I guess if somebody there who works there recognizes them and decides to turn them in, then certainly they'll get in trouble. But they could just as easily have a friend go in with that cash and bet for them, right?
We are in a time of peak tattletaling, though.
Right. But like, okay, if I'm an NFL player, you're my buddy, I give you $100, I say, go to the Emerald Queen Casino and throw it on my team for me. No one's going to know. No one's going to know that money's coming to me ultimately, right? Yeah. So there are ways around this. I mean, if they really want to bet on their own team, they can have someone go do it for them.
Yeah, and I would assume any real scandal is going to go that way. Like if anyone's got the like wherewithal to create a huge conspiracy. Yeah. I think that they're gonna also not do it on FanDuel or fucking BetMGM or whatever the apps are that these guys are using.
Yeah, and I mean, it's naive to think that these guys don't gamble. You know, I've been to casinos before where I've seen pro athletes gambling, usually playing just like table games or whatever, but they're competitors. So, of course, and they're competitors and they have a lot of money. Of course, they're going to gamble. It's just, I think what makes this difficult and this space very tough to navigate right now is that these leagues and these teams are probably not doing enough to like educate their players on what they can and cannot do. Like you have to be very specific about what you can gamble on, how you can gamble. Like if you want to go play blackjack, that's okay. If you want to go bet on football and you're a football player, that's not okay. Like there has to be like more education around this. And it almost feels like in some ways they're baiting players, even though it's kind of like, I guess the assumption is that people know that you're not supposed to do this, but it's clearly not communicated well enough. Yeah. And, you know, at the same time, even though it does sometimes come across a little bit hypocritical that these leagues are cracking down on players when they are in bed with these betting agencies, I totally get what you're saying. I mean, it makes sense that you have to protect the
I'd almost
welfare
bet
and the
that the
integrity
betting
of the game.
agencies have this as a rule, as like a condition of the sponsorship, because they don't want the league to look corrupt either. Because if that product is corrupt, then so I don't think I think the only people who are getting fucked in this, unfortunately, are the players. Right. But they're also like, it's part of the reason why they're making twice as much money as they would have been if like the league had just continued to like in a linear sense progress in revenue, you know? Yeah,
I think the thing that really sucks about it is that clearly the education on this subject is not as good as it should be with these players. And if you're Jameson Williams or if you're Isaiah Rodgers maybe, you know, a couple notches below Jameson Williams, Calvin Ridley last year, they're going to ultimately be fine. They're good enough players that they're going to come back from this. A team is still going to be interested in their services after a year-long suspension. That's not going to be an issue. It's the guys who are getting suspended that are already fringe NFL players that just got roped into going along with their buddy who might be a little bit better at the game. It sucks for those guys because they might never play this sport again for something as silly as throwing a few bets down on a football game. And that's where it feels like we have to have, I understand like there's no easy way to police this sort of thing. If you're the NFL or any of these sports leagues, there's no easy way to do this, but there has to be like some discretion. Like if you want to suspend Jameson Williams for a year, okay.
Well, he didn't get suspended for a year though.
Oh, 6 games or whatever.
Yes, it does seem like there is some discretion. Like Calvin Ridley got a year. Jameson Williams got 6 games. I think other guy, one of the Lions got a year, and then the other guy got less games.
If you're like a fringe guy, just can you slap him on the wrist or something?
Oh
like,
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like
you want like
I want like the fringe guys to have a chance.
Income based suspensions.
Almost, yeah.
I don't mind that.
I don't even mind income based so much as like talent based. Like you if you're the league,
you run a 40 for your fucking suspension.
If this player is good enough to bounce back from this.
If you run a 4.6, you're scot-free, dude.
Doesn't it seem stupid that like this could be a death sentence for certain guys' careers? That seems stupid.
I mean, yeah, I think it's stupid, but it's also like the integrity of the game can only take so many hits before it's a death sentence for these partnerships.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again,
this is also, by the way, like I think a good example of why this is important is baseball is struggling, and they're talking about moving to Vegas. The NHL and the NFL both moved to Vegas. It's been great for them. And the Vegas thing probably with the NFL comes only because there's these years of like embracing gambling.
Yeah.
Embracing gambling is a huge positive financial decision for the NFL. And it could be for these other leagues. But if the NFL kind of shows too much corruption, eventually that money will dry up.
Yeah.
Kind of like the way the NBA partnering with China. Now it's like Daryl Morey puts out a tweet that's like slightly critical of the Chinese Communist Party, and the NBA loses $1 billion, and everybody's bending over to take it in the ass from the Chinese government in the NBA for no reason, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it is, it's tricky for sure. But yeah. I think, like you said, it brings being tied to gambling for all of these sports is beneficial to them.
Sure.
It makes the games more interesting. If you are a novice fan and all of a sudden you have money riding on it, even if it's just you and me watching a game and we put $10 on each team or something, all of a sudden you have a reason to watch this game.
It's so much more fun to watch.
Yeah, start to finish, you have a stake in this game that you're going to pay attention to.
Well, we talked about me gambling with our mutual friend on the golf course and how that's I'm not a good golfer, but it made that much more exciting. It made the back nine.
And you won.
And that was much better.
So
also,
you made money on top of that.
That's true.
But I'm not the type of person that would ever, I like to gamble in a casino, but I would never gamble on the golf course because I don't believe in my own ability. If I was one of these players, I would not be betting on my own team.
Yeah. If I have a putt for $5, I will miss that putt. It doesn't matter the distance.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter the amount of money or the distance.
Yes. No, I totally get it. All right. So,
speaking of morally corrupt,
man, what a friggin' story to wake up to this week. You check your phone. I checked my phone and it was like the first notification from ESPN, LIV and PGA Tour merging. And even if you're not okay, this story has been kind of going on for a while now. The LIV Tour came about a year ago. But it's more of a social story than a human interest in some ways than it is about sports. Even if you don't care about golf, this story is huge right now.
Yeah. So to summarize, the Saudi government, and I'm going to summarize it and you can add detail where you'd like to.
Yeah.
The Saudi government created this golf league. They used this, what is it called? It's FIP.
PIF, I think.
PIF.
Yeah.
Public Investment Fund. And it's government money.
Right.
They basically created this loss leader. They basically, all they didn't make any money. They just challenged the PGA. They just took leverage away from the PGA, who was operating essentially a monopoly with the greatest players in the world.
Yeah.
And because of that, there was no collective bargaining. There was no reason for the PGA to treat players better. This LIV Golf Tour pays these players an exorbitant amount of money. Phil Mickelson, one of the greatest golfers of all time, got a contract that was reportedly 2.5 times his career earnings. One of the most decorated careers in the history of golf.
Yeah.
And he got 2.5 times his career earnings. Many of these guys were signing for 9-figure deals, which was just insane compared to what. And then they would lose sponsorships, and it was unpopular because the Saudi government has some human rights issues.
Yeah, that's putting it nicely.
Sure. So first off, and I'm not a big 9/11 historian by any means. Contemporary belief is that the Saudi government holds most/all, or I think probably most of the blame for 9/11.
Yeah.
Or at least they are the government that holds the most. Obviously, it was conducted by a terrorist group, but these So I guess we'll just say it, and then I'll make my devil's advocate points later.
Yeah.
They propped up this terrorist group.
Yes, there is a lot of controversy around the Saudi government. And
Sure.
Saudi government, they create this PIF, the Public Investment Fund, as basically a way to, according to what I'm looking at right here, created in 1971 for the purpose of investing funds on behalf of the government of Saudi Arabia. So
Sure.
basically, the government of Saudi Arabia is investing in sports.
Sure.
And kind of like the criticism of this whole process is that they're basically using golf as a way to kind of put like a positive spin on all the bad shit that they do as a government.
Sure.
Right. And, you can do whatever you want with your money. So they totally have a right to do that. They made it worth the players' while to come be on the LIV Tour. The LIV Tour has been, I think, what most would consider an unmitigated disaster. They broadcast games on the CW.
Sure.
No one watches them. They cut out of tournaments. The format for their tournaments is not that fun, as it turns out. There's just a lot that goes on that makes it worse golf. It's kind of like a minor league, but they're paying people so much money that why wouldn't they come join this tour?
Right. They created this thing, and it's a perfect analogy. And this got sent to me also with like, it's one of those videos where they put the LIV logo and the PGA logo on like a sitcom characters. And when in The Office, so I'm taking this from a meme is what I'm saying. In The Office, Michael Scott leaves Dunder Mifflin, creates the Michael Scott Paper Company.
Yes.
It wasn't that his company was successful, but it was that it was hurting Dunder Mifflin enough that they had to do something. So they basically bought him out.
Yeah.
And they didn't, I don't think this is a buyout. It's a merger. I guess we'll see what the details are.
I've seen that comparison a lot. People have used the Michael Scott Paper Company as a punchline for this entire merger. But the one thing I would say is that they basically reverse the roles. It'd be like if the Michael Scott Paper Company bought Dunder Mifflin in this case, because what has basically happened is that the LIV Tour comes about a year ago. Everybody thinks, okay, this is going to be short-lived. These players who have defected over to the LIV Tour are going to pay fines or pay some sort of price to have to get back into the PGA at some point in time.
Also, there was some idea that many of these players were like washed up past their prime.
There was, but initially that was the case. Initially, they get Phil Mickelson. They get some of these older players that have had good careers.
Phil Mickelson, who tithes for second at the Masters this year.
Yeah. And then
Brooks Koepka coming off of an injury, who wins was it the U.S. Open or the PGA Championship this year? Whichever one just happened. This is the other thing for me is like, this is interesting to me. I don't follow professional golf nearly as closely as other sports.
I don't either. I mean, I follow it a little bit, and we both like to golf.
Yes.
But following the sport itself is like, unless you are just rooting for one player, like why would you necessarily follow the sport? It's not like super compelling most of the time until you have a story like this. So, I mean, this becomes a big story over the past year or so. And of course, as soon as people find out that the Saudi government is behind this league, behind these exorbitant salaries that they're paying players, everybody has an opinion all of a sudden. Most people here in America.
Sure.
This is like the one thing that is like kind of bridge the political divide, whether you're liberal or conservative. I've heard people on both ends of the spectrum who are upset about the LIV Tour because whatever their belief is, whether, again, conservative or liberal, it goes against what the Saudi government stands for. Because if you're a liberal person, you think the morality of what these people are doing, what these golfers are doing, going and taking what is effectively blood money from this government agency is wrong. And if you're a conservative person, you're saying they're not patriotic, right? Like like you mentioned earlier, this is a group that could be seen as at least partially responsible for one of the worst terrorist acts in American history.
And now outside of like Pearl Harbor, it's got to be
right. And now you have American golfers going and basically working for these people, right? Like, so no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, this sports story has somehow united Americans.
By the way, I'm not trying to. Pearl Harbor was not a terrorist attack; it was a military attack. But it was like outside of Pearl Harbor, or maybe including Pearl Harbor, was the most significant attack on U.S. soil since the Revolutionary War.
Absolutely, yes. I don't think there's any denying that. So just from like a historical perspective, this is there's a lot to take into account with this story that just happens to do with golf.
So there's a bad Bryson DeChambeau. By the way, there's like 3 players that I like a lot, and Bryson DeChambeau is one of them, but it's the same reasons that I like Trevor Bauer. It's not because I like agree with him politically. He's a tinkerer.
Yeah.
He's an analytics guy. He's like sees the game differently than other people, positive or negative. He does see. He uses single length irons, which to me make a ton of sense, and I use single length irons. The clubs that I was using.
This is like when I about a year or two ago I had the idea to take an inch off my driver.
Sure, I've also done this.
And when I took it into the shop, the guy who was like 3 inches shorter than me was like, "That's too much. You're too tall." I'm like, first of all, this is the first time in my life anyone's ever said I was too tall.
Yeah.
And second of all, I had looked up online just to see the pros and how long they keep their drivers. Almost every single one of them takes some distance or takes some length off their driver or their clubs, because they make them for like guys who are like 6'5".
Yeah. I don't want this argument with those people, so I started doing that stuff at home. I did the same thing. I'm a tinkerer. Golf is a game with a limitless tinkering, right?
Absolutely.
And I think he's an interesting guy. On YouTube, he explains stuff very well. He has this interview with Caitlin Collins, who became famous recently, in my world anyway, for the town hall she did with Donald Trump, where I actually I don't know. We do this thing. There's this conservative thing that it's conservatives that do this where they go, she's so bad at this, or she is just not good at this, or something like that. And it's like, I mean, she's reached like the pinnacle of her field. This is what it bothers me too when people are like, Donald Trump is stupid, Joe Biden is stupid. I'm like, you may disagree with them, but these are not stupid men. Like, these guys have ascended to become the leader of the free world.
Yeah,
they've done something that's somewhat intelligent.
This is how society works now. It's if you see something that opposes your viewpoint. In this case, Caitlin Collins is a CNN anchor. So if you are on a certain side of the political spectrum, CNN is your enemy. And like what you just said with like Biden and Trump, if you see either one of those as opposing you, you just immediately resort to the name calling. Yeah. Even if you know, like even in the back of your mind, you know that you're wrong for it. The way we deal with our problems now is to just immediately resort to hitting below the belt. Right?
What I will say I like about Caitlin Collins and Bryson DeChambeau is that liberals and conservatives hated Caitlin Collins. and similarly, like, I think DeChambeau is a thorn in the side of everybody.
Yeah.
And I like that, because to me, I trust those people. I believe that they're doing like what they actually mean. There was someone else that I was going to talk to you about like this, that's like, oh, it was, Mike Pence came out as like, they were like, would you ban abortion? And he's like, of course I would. And it's like, yeah, he's honest. Like
I mean, you know that he was going to say, we'll get to this.
But he's not wishy-washy.
Let's set up what happens here. So at the time we're recording this, it's barely been 24 hours since news of this merger, bro. This is still a really big deal.
Also, there's another question here, which is, because we didn't bring everything, are we going to try to somehow capture this interview?
No, I think we can just summarize it. I think, in the 24 hours since this news is broke, or slightly more than that, somehow they've managed to get a ton of microphones in front of pro golfers to get their take on what occurred here. And
well, I think there's like, they're preparing for a tournament, right? Like,
yeah, there's a couple things that have happened. One, it seems evident from most PGA golfers, they had no idea this was going to happen. The general consensus is that the commissioner or the CEO of the PGA, I don't know exactly what his title is, the guy who heads up the PGA, Jay Monahan, he basically decided he wanted to get his cut of this exorbitant amount of money, and he sold out to the LIV Tour. He sold out to the Saudis. So he's going to get paid. He's going to be like Roger Goodell, but with golf. He's going to get a ton of money, and he sold out his entire league. That's effectively what he did, according to the PGA golfers who we've heard from already. But now, of course, they're talking to some of the LIV golfers, like Bryson DeChambeau. So he goes on CNN this morning, and I don't know who signed him up for this, but it was a terrible idea because he walked into a bear trap. I'm sure going into this, a lot of times when pro athletes do interviews like this, it's not to say that the questions are totally vetted ahead of time, but there is usually some agreement on what can and cannot be discussed.
Right.
And in this case, it seems like
they didn't ask him about gum disease. I'll tell you that much. They left gum disease off the table. These hard-hitting gum disease questions.
In this case, they either didn't prepare for these questions ahead of time, or CNN went off script.
Sure.
One of these two things happened because Bryson DeChambeau gets asked about two things that he probably had no idea was coming. He gets asked about 9/11, which is never a good start.
Sure.
And then he gets asked about the American journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who a couple years ago was in Saudi Arabia and was murdered, presumably by the Saudi Arabian government.
It seems like it was by the government.
Or at the behest of the government. And still a hot button issue.
Sure.
Obviously, anytime you're dealing with the murder of anybody, let alone a journalist. So he gets asked about both these things, and he doesn't really know what to say. I'd say he handles it about as well as any pro athlete could handle those types of questions. But the reaction so far in the aftermath of this interview is a lot of people dunking all over Bryson DeChambeau. And again, it seems like I have no issue with people being upset with what DeChambeau said and how he answered these questions. He basically kind of poo-poos 9/11 and kind of...
To a degree, yeah. I think he qualifies it, but yeah, he first off, the guy's like 27 years old or something like that.
And he's a pro athlete. He's not...
Yeah, but also like...
he's not like a news person or a journalist. Like, what do you want him to say in this situation?
I'm going to pull up his age real quick because I do think his age is relevant because...
Right.
And I'm gonna make this point a little bit later, but he is... Let's see, hold on. He is 29 years old. So he was like 6 or 7 years old, or maybe 7 or 8 years old when 9/11 happened.
Yeah.
I was 14. To me, it feels like a very distant memory. I'm sure if you were 18, 21, 30 when that happened, it's like even more significant. Part of my problem with this whole like this expectation that part of my problem with the painting of the PGA as the good guys and LIV as the bad guys, because first off, the U.S. government does like $50 billion of business with Saudi Arabia every year. Also, the PGA has sponsorships with Mercedes, with Volkswagen, with Nike, with these companies that also have these huge human rights concerns.
Yeah.
Mercedes was building fucking tanks or building vehicles and in Nazi Germany. Like these are part of the reason we're able to accept Mercedes is because that was 80 years ago.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like they just became a sponsor.
Yeah.
So time does heal some of those wounds in capitalism, whether you like it or not. And this dude is fucking barely remembers 9/11 probably.
That I absolutely agree with that. Two things. First, with respect to this interview itself, I feel like not just Bryson DeChambeau, I'm not giving him a pass here, but I think it's silly sometimes when we ask these types of questions of athletes. What are you expecting from these people? How would you expect a 29-year-old pro athlete who in his everyday life is so distant from an average person's reality that you could ask them what they think about the grocery store down the street, and they'll probably give you a different answer than what you'd expect.
You were the one that was talking about there was a football player that they like asked how much you think a gallon of milk is, and he was like $50. $20 bucks.
Yeah. Their perception of reality is different than ours, and of course, to the average person, that means it's bad, right?
Sure.
Like that their perception of reality is bad, and it's like you can think that, you can think it's bad, but a lot of times these guys are naive. And again, I'm not trying to give them a free pass. They kind of have to get themselves to our level. But the way that they go about their lives being pro athletes makes it harder to do that. Yep. It does, because you are so focused to get to the top of your profession of whatever it is, whether it's sports or otherwise. You're often so focused on whatever that thing is that you just don't have the capacity to pay attention to what might be going on in the world around you. And again, a lot of people are going to say that's that person's fault. And I agree to some degree.
So I think if you go into this interview, you got to be prepared to have answers for that. I think the answers he gave are political scripted answers, which what do you want him to say or do? That they probably didn't want him to do this interview, like you said. But also, I think the thing is, we're all the star of our own movie, but we rarely get put in front of cameras, right? Like you and I have a camera on us right now that we are aware of. But most people, like comedians, they think the rest of the world cares about comedy and knows about comedy so much more than they actually do. The day job you have, people view these things happening at your company, these interpolitical shit. I'm not saying this about your company in particular. I'm assuming based on companies I've worked at in the past. I can't even remember the name of the company you work for, but they believe. I worked at a box factory, and it was like people's lives were so compartmentalized that they're like, this thing happening at this box factory is the greatest injustice in my life. And it's like, fine, kind of, but it's also, people are being murdered in Yemen on a daily basis, and we're supposed to and also the other thing is like the PGA is full of a bunch of fucking old racist white guys, and our government is also taking part in horrific atrocities for centuries, or for decades at least.
And that's kind of where I wanted to go next. I mean, I think to kind of summarize, like, we need to have maybe lower expectations when we stick a camera and a microphone in front of an athlete and ask them very serious questions that, frankly, based on their age, their profession, what they do every day, they might not have the best answers for, because that's not...
But they want to make bad guys.
If somebody came up to you on the street and asked you about 9/11 out of the blue, you might not have a great answer for them. Even though we all agree it's very bad. Yes, and I get it. Sometimes you just want these guys to say that, but they're trying to find the right way they're trying to find the right way around it. And again, it's just silly to expect pro athletes sometimes. I know that a lot of times they want to be more than the guy who just dribbles the ball or throws the ball or whatever. Right. But the reality is they're not often that. And that there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with them being that.
Sure.
So it's silly to expect perfect answers for these types of questions.
It's also silly to expect perfect morality from for-profit institutions. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's where I want to go next, because I think the reaction when the LIV Tour was first created, a lot of moral righteousness from people. Yeah. And I get it. A lot of people said, you can't get into bed with the Saudi government because of all the bad things they've done that we've talked about, right? But I think for a lot of people who were very upset about the LIV Tour existing were big golf fans. And the pervasive thought that I had is that they were upset because their perception of their sport was being tarnished by this competitive entity, right? Regardless of the morality of the competitive entity, just the fact that the competitive entity came into existence pissed them off, right? Now golf is going to suffer. Now the golf that I love is going to suffer because of this thing. And it just so happens that this thing is an easy target for the political, controversy, right?
Sure.
So it became a lot of moral righteousness in the wake of the LIV Tour. And obviously this merger in the past couple of days has now reignited those discussions.
Yeah. Well, it's also identified the hypocrisy that like the PGA was never some moral entity.
No.
They were just also capitalists. Also, I will say one thing, when the quotes from Phil Mickelson's autobiography got leaked, where he said like, these are bad motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Or scary motherfuckers or whatever. It took away the innocence of, we didn't actually realize how bad they were. Like, they knew. The guy knew. The main guy the first guy I almost knocked your whole desk, almost crumbled the whole desk by bumping my knee into it one time. God, I gotta lose weight. But the controversial guy, the guy that was already a heel in golf in a lot of cases,
right?
He acknowledged that people don't like these guys, and I know it, and we're still going to make this decision. Which is I actually respect that a lot more than I don't think they would if that didn't get leaked. I don't know that he would have ever admitted to knowing everything that he does know.
No, I think a lot of the expectation people have for these guys who have gotten into bed with the LIV Tour is that you just want them to be forthright about their intentions.
Sure.
Right? There's so many of these guys have talking points that kind of dismiss accountability for what they've done. If somebody just comes out and says, I joined this tour because it's going to give me more money than I've ever had in my life. And it's going to set me up forever. It's going to set my family up forever, future generations of my family forever.
Yeah.
That's why I did this. I think a lot of people would be like, all right.
Yeah.
That's fine. I guess I would have done something similar.
Maybe. I think there's a lot of people who'd be like, yeah, but what about the families? Your family's set up, but what about the families of people who lost people in 9/11? And I fully respect that. It's not to take away from 9/11. In fact, I do think that the Saudi government is like they're a stain on the earth. But I think that when you leave America, when you talk to people from outside of America, the U.S. government is not viewed as this like righteous, entity that is creating peace in the world.
I mean, in a lot of places, we're probably on the same level.
Of course.
As the Saudis to people outside of the U.S.
Sure.
And that's, a lot of people say people that went to the LIV Tour who took this money, they're taking blood money. And my argument would be that all money is blood money when you get right down to it, right?
Sure.
Like we think if it originates in America, then it's okay, right? If your company is from here and they're the one giving you your paycheck, then it's okay. And it's like, man, when you get up to the top of those companies, all you got to do is watch a show like Succession on HBO, and you'll see that even the people with the money in America are not exactly great people.
Right.
There's just a reality that we often try to make ourselves naive to in some ways.
It's hard to become an employee of any company without bending your morality to some degree.
Absolutely.
And then as the incentives get larger, and these guys, many of them are very wealthy, but not all of them. Like some of the guys that are in the LIV Tour were not like top level PGA golfers.
Yeah.
These are guys that maybe this is their only opportunity. It's the my thing with this, it's common in all sports, which is that fans have a hard time understanding that almost all of them should relate with the players who are labor instead of the owners who are management, right? And in this case, it's like you're defending the PGA. You should, like, to me, the PGA could have avoided this by being more generous to their players, to making the make the product more interesting for the consumers, all that stuff. Get rid of the this stuffy image that golf rightly has. Make younger people like it by making younger people like it, not by holding a monopoly and going like it or watch or don't watch golf.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's anyone who you can feel sorry for in this situation, it's like the average PGA golfer, right? And golf especially. Golf is one of those sports where, unlike most of our pro sports, in football, basketball, baseball, you're paying players obviously to their performance to some degree, but a lot of times you're handing out contracts to guys who don't deserve it or they don't live up to the money, right? In golf, more than any other sport, you're getting paid for performance. You are literally competing for your paycheck every week with the people you play against.
Not only are you competing for your paycheck, but you're investing money every week.
You're paying to play, basically. So golf, more than any other sport, you should be siding with the players over the league.
Sure.
The head of the PGA decided to sell out. He's going to get a ton of money, I'm sure, from the Saudi government for doing this. The problem, if you are a golf fan now, or even just a sports fan in general, or even just somebody who cares about social morality, is that the Saudi Arabian government basically owns all of golf. I know it'll of course get phrased differently, but the reality is the LIV Tour basically bought the PGA, which means the Saudi government basically bought all of the golf leagues in the world, the major pro golf leagues. So that in and of itself, now you've just created a different monopoly. Previously, there was an American monopoly, you could say, with the PGA.
Sure.
Now there's a Saudi monopoly on golf. And so we're kind of back to square one, except ownership. There's been a transfer of ownership. Sure. That's about it.
One before we move on, because I don't think we should, because we're an hour and 7 minutes into this. Oh, did I lose it? I think I might have lost my thought. I might have just blurted out when I think of it later.
Okay, that's fine. The one thing I'll just say at the end of this is that the PGA golfers, they learned...
I know what it was.
Okay, go ahead.
The guys that got fucked the hardest are the guys who were on the fringe of the modern PGA, because the fringe dropped. It went lower because there were these, 54 whatever amount of golfers in the LIV Tour that were all ranked ahead of those guys. And these guys had the aspirations.
Yeah.
They probably invested money in them, in their training, in these tournaments, qualifying tournaments they're playing. That now they're like, well, now the carrot is much further away than it was a day ago, kind of like, but I'll say that, and I'll say this about, to relate it to comedy, which I would obnoxiously do about almost anything, is there was a new club that opened in Tacoma a couple of years ago, super funny comedy club. They've never booked me on one show ever. Now, of course, am I bitter about that? Of course I am. I'm a fucking egomaniac, but I still want the club to exist. I want them to succeed because the more spots there are, the more spots I get.
Yeah, more opportunity.
Right. It means that, like, I've always put it like because comics are inherently like insecure and all that. There's like 6 local comedian spots every weekend in the Seattle-Tacoma area. With them open, there's 8. 8 is not a lot. There's like 500 people trying to do comedy in Seattle. 8 of us get to do it every Friday and Saturday, and on like a paid club show.
Yeah.
So the fact that there's 8 means that there's like, maybe I'll get 1 more gig a year, 2 more gigs a year because somebody else is doing these other, these 8 gigs.
Yeah.
More often or whatever, or at this other place. So it's the more spaces there was good for the people at the bottom end.
Yeah.
And that this could potentially, we don't actually know the structure though. Those guys could actually still benefit.
No, I think you're right. I mean, the guys who were kind of poised to become the new faces of the PGA are now back to where they were in the pecking order before the
But I'm even
tour
talking about
existed.
the guys who are like at the
very bottom,
the like at the fringe of even being in the league, not the fringe of being famous, but even the fringe of being part of the PGA.
Right, guys who were just barely making it into these tournaments in the first place, now might be knocked out of these tournaments again because who knows what this structure is going to look like. But I mean, the thing it seems like they learned, and this is something we all learn at various points in life, regardless of your profession, is that at the end of the day, no matter how often you're told by your employer that they care about you, that we're a family, your employer doesn't, they care about
the money.
Tugging
at my heartstrings right now.
They care about the money more than they care about you.
Yeah.
That's the society we live in. It's a capitalistic society. That is the reality of the world we are a part of. And these PGA golfers learned that the hard way yesterday, as many of us often do when we're working. And it sucks to have, I'm sure for a lot of these guys who have never had a real job, outside of playing golf, this is blindsiding to them. And it's blindsiding to all of us once you realize that. But when you realize it, then you can kind of shift your approach. You understand that, like, hey, we're all in it to make money, myself included. And at the end of the day, you got to look out for yourself. And that's ultimately what the PGA commissioner did. And it sucks for the guys that trusted him. It sucks for those guys because they trusted this guy to do right by them. And he did not. He did right by himself.
Yep.
So, yeah, tough.
Should we lightning round these last couple national topics?
Let's do it. Let's hit them quick.
All right. So the first one is, we'll do the first one I want to say is the Iron Sheik. Professional wrestler died.
Yeah,
81 years old.
I only know him as a Twitter personality.
Yeah, well,
I was not a wrestling fan.
I wasn't a wrestling fan either, but I know he spent a lot of time at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles. What I will miss the most, because I know he was a heel in wrestling, and I have respect for wrestling, but I'm like, since the Stone Cold, The Rock era is the only era of wrestling I really loved. Right. He was not a big figure in wrestling at that time. Yes, him eulogizing people online was always like, first off, it was insane, all caps, but it was always very like sweet and nice. Yeah. And like obviously genuine because it was insane every time. Yeah. And, that is sad. 81 years old. I mean, by the way, though, 81 years old, a longtime wrestler, that's not a common story you hear.
By wrestling standards, 81 years old. I mean, by anybody's standards, 81 years old is a life well lived in most cases, but especially for a professional wrestler who you hear so many of these guys passing away at a very young age. So the fact that he made it to 81 is awesome. Yeah, I mean, this guy, I didn't know a ton about him growing up as a wrestler, but in recent years, his nephews basically started a Twitter account for him that he obviously co-sponsored in some ways. I'm sure a lot of the stuff that was tweeted out was on his behalf as opposed to direct from him. Sure. But, they basically reinvented him as an online personality. And it was a personality, as you mentioned, that resonated with a lot of people.
Also,
so
a guy, by
cool
the way, like not to belabor this Middle East he was an Iranian wrestler in the 80s and 90s, which is like kind of groundbreaking. It's, they, by the way, they did a lot of stuff that he probably just was hated still.
I'm sure. I mean, the old school wrestling days, anyone who was an ethnic wrestler was often a heel.
Yeah.
And there was very racial
stereotypical,
tropes, yeah, that were assigned to them. But you're right, though. I mean, that's still, in and of itself, is still groundbreaking in some ways, for sure.
And then so Josh Allen is on the Madden cover. I've bought Madden almost every year since 2001 when Eddie George was on the cover, I believe.
I had the Eddie George one, yeah.
I had a 3-year gap, and then other than that, I've bought Madden every year. It's the only game I play on a regular basis.
I sold an Xbox 360 in like 2011. And I've had no game. We've had little gaming consoles, but nothing like that ever since.
The newest one's PS5, right?
Sure.
Okay. I have the PS4 that I bought. Like, I bought it basically just to play Grand Theft Auto and Madden, and then I put it away for about 3 years. That's why I stopped buying them.
Yeah.
And then when the pandemic started, I hooked it back up, and it was like a anti-anxiety medication for me to just like sit and go like, well, I can't do shit. I'm not working. I can't leave my house. Nothing's open. The world is ending. I guess I'll rebuild the Seahawks. Like, I don't know. Now, I mean, what ends up happening is I'm sure I'll buy this game. I will have a new child, so it will get planted back in my living room, and it'll be the thing where when my new daughter is crying or won't go to sleep, that I use to soothe my own anxiety to keep myself from throwing her out the window. So thank you, Josh Allen, for gracing the cover of a life-saving device for my children.
And also, if you hate the Bills, this is great news because the Madden curse should really impact Josh Allen this year. No, it's funny because I only used to play Madden and Grand Theft Auto as well.
Oh yeah.
But I kind of quit around the Vice City days, or I probably took Vice City far too long. I played it many times, beat the game, kept going. It was just fun.
It's confusing to me now because I bought I think it's San Andreas is the most, or Grand Theft Auto 5.
They've had a few iterations since then.
But it's like, it just like keeps, I'm like, is this a new game or is this like an expansion pack? Because I didn't even beat the old game. So, and it's also, I have a problem with that game now too, which is my daughter has started to repeat things.
Oh no.
So the other day I was listening to a rap song and it said like fuck you motherfucker, something like that. And my daughter's like, what does fuck you motherfucker mean? And I'm like, oh no, like she somehow filtered out swear words for almost 4 years. And now it's like every single thing is a point of curiosity.
Yeah. Grand Theft Auto is not great for kids. Yeah. We can be honest about that. All right.
And then the last one, which will lead into our local sports controversy, is Jacob deGrom, recent signee of the Texas Rangers, is getting Tommy John surgery. And I'm only using it as a lead-in. DeGrom has been he's been like one of the best pitchers in baseball for years, but there's been these kind of warning signs about his this Tommy John surgery now, though, like this is like something you can almost prescribe to a guy. In 3 years, you're going to need Tommy John surgery.
Tommy John surgery, like if this was as pervasive now as it was back when we were playing baseball in high school, we probably both would have had Tommy John surgery.
Dude, there was a guy that I went to high school with who got it as like yes, you have a little bit of ligament damage.
Yeah.
This will increase your velocity to fix this. Like you don't even have a tear.
Yeah.
You just have some wear and tear.
Yeah.
And that was like, to me, seemed crazy. I read, there's a book by Keith Law, I believe, called The Arm, but it's all about Tommy John surgeries. And the Tommy John surgeries, one of the things about it is they're not like permanent fixes, right? Like,
no, you can have repeated Tommy John surgeries. And then
the success rate goes down considerably it was got Todd Coffey, maybe. They talked about he had I think 2 Tommy John surgeries, and then he had a third one. I think it was him. It was a pitcher, but what they do is to really ruin everyone's time listening to this. They drill holes into your elbow, and then they weave this ligament that they get from somewhere through that. So he had the surgery 3 times. the bone, there wasn't enough bone left, and it ripped it, like broke the bone.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah. So one, Jacob deGrom will be fine. He's like the beginning of a contract, but he's in his 30s. He's going to be what he's going to be. That's not really what I want to talk about. What I really want to talk about is, because this is the
DeGrom, really quick. DeGrom is 34. As you mentioned, he's kind of been injury prone the last couple of years. So this is one of those things that when you're 34 and you've had some warning signs, like to say that it'll just come back at age presumably 35 and be the same guy is assuming a lot.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think he's like, he probably isn't going to come back and be the same guy. My point is like, this was basically, you could have expected this to be the case.
Yes, and it's not like the Rangers. No one should feel sorry for the Texas Rangers. If you want to feel sorry for Jacob deGrom, absolutely.
He's also, I think, in the first year of a 5-year contract.
Yeah, he's playing for
making live golf money.
He's basically playing for the best team in baseball right now. They just beat the doors off the Mariners in a 3-game series. Swept
brutal.
them, but it was no doubter.
Yeah.
They kicked their ass. So, yeah, the Rangers hardly need this guy at the moment. Although, who knows? If they don't make it to the World Series or they get to the World Series and lose, you could always make the argument that it would have helped to have an ace.
Yeah.
Which they don't right now.
Okay. So there's this controversy in Seattle about the offseason, about the Mariners not spending. There's this like age-old, and I think I'm going to let you give me like the kind of cliff notes on the present day controversy, but this is like a constant mid-market argument. It's not just a Seattle thing. It's a mid-market baseball team thing where the fans always want the team to spend more money. Most fans, fine, don't have a perfect understanding of Major League Baseball finances. I acknowledge that, but not even to say that I do.
Yeah.
But it's like, this is a constant thing. The team is cheap. The team doesn't care about winning. So can you explain this offseason for the Mariners and what they needed, what they didn't do, and then I'm going to tell you why I disagree.
Why
with
I'm wrong.
No. I mean, I don't.
This feels like a trap.
It's not a trap. It's not a trap for you. I think like, and I'll be. You will have probably some critiques of the methodology. So
okay, well, the Mariners are especially complicated because the perception is ownership is cheap.
Yeah,
which I don't 100% agree with.
Sure.
But they're bad at spending money. When they do spend money, they're often overpaying for a guy like Robinson Cano because it's tough to get free agents to come to Seattle. That is the reality. I know it's like an unspoken reality. And
sure.
I think we've talked about this before a little bit on this podcast. There are numerous reasons why. One, the travel from here sucks. So if you are a player that doesn't want to spend a lot of time on the road, you know, Seattle's about as far away from all the other major league cities as possible. There's no opponent that's very close to us. You're always going to be a 90-minute plane ride away at least, right?
Yeah.
From your nearest opponent. On top of that, there's just not a lot of baseball players that live here. So, you know, if you're like a California team, there's a lot of guys that grew up in California that would want to go back and play there. Or same with the East Coast, right? So far from home, far from other teams. We can get in. We don't need to get into the politics, but there is a political element. I think there's a lot.
Yeah, that's possible.
Baseball. There's a lot of players. The majority of baseball, as we've talked about in the past, conservative.
Sure.
Seattle and the Pacific Northwest certainly does not have that perception. Whether you think there are pockets, of course, but
sure.
The perception outside of this area is that it's very liberal here. So, you know, it could be tough to get someone to want to come here for numerous reasons. So you have to overpay for these guys. So the history of the Seattle Mariners when it comes to free agency, just not very good at it. This year in particular, there was a lot of big name bats out there that they could have signed and they did not.
Well, that they could have is, but I think
they could have in that anyone could have, right?
Sure.
Like when you have a lot of free agents that fill positions of need for your team and you fail to sign any of them,
right.
That looks bad, regardless of the reasons. Even if you tried your hardest to get them here, even if you offered them more than what they're worth or what they eventually signed for,
sure.
The fact that you didn't close the deal to get them here reflects badly.
Yeah.
Onto your fan base. And so fans are upset because they only brought in a couple acquisitions. They were middling acquisitions. They've already released one of the guys. They already released Tommy La Stella, who they acquired, who they, kind of half-heartedly said would be the Mariners' everyday-ish DH.
Sure.
He was gone a month into the season, right? They bring in a second baseman in Colton Wong via trade, who's making $10 million, who's already been displaced as a starter. They bring in an aging AJ Pollock with the intention of platooning him in left field with
back with the platoon
with Jared Kelenic.
Odd pronunciation.
Yes. And in reality, Jared Kelenic wins that job outright, wins an everyday spot. Pollock basically never plays.
Sure.
All the guys they brought in did very little to improve a team that had high hopes from last year.
Teoscar Hernandez had stretches.
Teoscar Hernandez, they acquire via trade. They bring him in to replace Mitch Haniger in right field. You could basically call that a wash.
Sure.
Haniger was probably a better player on an everyday basis, but he's rarely available because of injuries. Whereas Teoscar, his numbers might be a little less by comparison, but he's available every day, which goes a long ways. And in fact, I don't know if this has changed, but a couple days ago, he was like one of 2 Mariner position players to have appeared in every single game so far this year. So he's clearly, as a veteran, entrenched himself in this lineup. He's probably the one guy that they've brought in that has already kind of paid dividends. I know he's underperformed to his career numbers, but he's been dependable, and that counts for
different
something.
Ballpark, all the shit, like the career numbers.
Dependability matters in baseball these days too. I think that's a real issue. So they just didn't improve the way fans would expect them to, and they're kind of paying the price right now. Of course, we're only 2 months into the season, so there's still time. They could turn it around. But a lot of these teams, like the Rangers, as we just mentioned, have kind of surpassed them. And they did so by making improvements where the Mariners did not. Yeah. So now go ahead and tell me why I'm wrong.
Okay, so I mean, I don't necessarily think you're wrong. I just think that this idea that I think one thing you're saying is I completely agree with, which is, I mean, I think you acknowledge that we agree on it, is it's hard to get guys to come to Washington. Even like sneakily, Washington has no state income tax, which it never gets included in the, like, Florida has no state income tax.
You
Texas,
always hear about it with Florida.
Right.
Yeah. Anytime someone goes to play for the Miami Heat, they're like, he only did it because he doesn't have to pay any income tax. Well, in fairness,
it's very difficult to come play for the Seattle Supersonics now. Like, it's even harder than coming to play for the Mariners.
But you're right, though. No one ever brings that up in baseball. It's like that should be a major selling point of every free agent pitch. You're going to get immediately like 10% back because you don't have to pay this tax.
It's especially for these horrible conservatives, they should like the less tax, but it's isolated. That's a problem. It's there's no like sustained history of winning, especially recently, but like there's no like, I don't think there's any prestige. Like you go play for the Yankees for less money because you're like, it's the fucking Yankees.
Yeah. There's no culture here. There's no culture whatsoever.
Yeah, there's no
for the team, not the area. Obviously, there's a lot of culture outside of the team itself, but the team has never created an identity for themselves. Like the Seahawks are a perfect example of a team that has created a culture and an identity that attracts people to come play for them.
Right,
and we're in the same geographic area, so how come the Mariners can't do that?
Right. Well, and so the Mariners lose on basically all intangibles. Yeah. And they lose on many of the tangibles, right? Which are distance traveled, the relative willingness to spend. I think and then like you even pointed out, the Robinson Cano signing was celebrated. I was thrilled about it. I thought it was like kind of a shot to take one last run at a playoff run with Felix Hernandez. I actually, going into that offseason, I wasn't expecting, because I believe, was that the Pujols, Fielder, Cano offseason?
I don't know if they were the same, but they were very close together.
I think Fielder and Pujols were the same one. And I remember my thought was, well, Cano's off the table, but you could maybe take a run at Fielder. That was, everyone thought they were going to sign Prince Fielder. They didn't.
Yeah.
So they have to overpay, but they also have to 10 years, $240 million, I believe, was the Cano deal.
Right.
And that's like a huge commitment. So I want to, what I put together was the last 5 World Series teams, winners and losers, last 5 years of World Series teams. So 10 teams total. Their top 5 WAR leaders.
Okay.
And how they were acquired. And we're not going to go through the whole list, but 10 of them were acquired in free agency out of 50. There was 8 acquired by trade. 32 of them were homegrown.
Yeah.
28 of them were in their first 6 years. So this is like a big football thing too, right? Is like the
early
the rookie contract, right?
Yeah.
The cheap rookie contract. So like the places these teams are getting this talent from is rarely free agency. By the way, 2 of those 10 players were acquired in free agency, but they were acquired because they were released as minor leaguers. Justin Turner, Max Muncy.
Yeah.
So 8 of 50 were acquired, and I think even then you're like, and the trades, like Justin Verlander is 2 of those traded guys on this list. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It is very difficult to build a team through free agency. Very difficult to build a team through trades. The way you have to, and the homegrown doesn't necessarily mean they drafted them. I just mean they made their minor league debut with that team.
Right.
It's the Mariners need to put together a roster that is deep enough, before, in my opinion, to be like a playoff contender before you start putting these guys are cherries on top. By the way, some recent success, last year's Phillies team, Bryce Harper was their 5th leader in WAR.
Yeah, I can see that.
One of the best players in the
and
one
a
of the
huge free
prospects.
agent. Huge free agent.
One of the biggest contracts of his time. JT Realmuto was their number 1, which is catchers have a weird thing with WAR, but he was a trade before he was eligible for free agency.
Yeah, I think the idea of free agents, or even like the big expensive trade acquisitions, is that should be the guy or the guys that put you over the top.
Right.
That take you from what the Mariners were last year, where they're a playoff team that wins a playoff series.
Sure.
To a team that can contend for the World Series, right? Like that's.
But the question is, was last year, were the Mariners actually good enough to view themselves as a playoff contender going into this, like a World Series contender, one guy away?
They said they were.
Well, they lie all the time.
Yeah, but if you're going to say that,
fair, that's fair.
And I think if you go and you win a playoff series with a lot of homegrown talent, right?
Yeah.
Like the homegrown, I think the Mariners actually might reinforce your point, because a lot of the key contributors on this team are homegrown. A lot of the pitching staff, George Kirby, Logan Gilbert, those are homegrown guys. Some of the other younger guys they have coming up. Julio Rodriguez, obviously, Jared Kelenic now this year, Kyle Raleigh, who was there last year.
Right.
These are all homegrown guys. And you would agree, I think anyone would agree, that those are part of the nucleus of this team. And I think what the Mariners were looking for, not a guy who's going to lead them in WAR, because presumably that guy should be Julio Rodriguez, right? If everything's clicking the way you would expect.
But even a top 5 guy in WAR is not that much to I don't think
true.
anyone's looking to spend $150 million, $300 million on a guy that's not going to be in the next couple years in the team's top 5 WAR leaders.
Then, I mean, if that's the case, then they're just not doing enough to develop guys. Then it seems like that would be kind of the next argument to be made.
Sure. Well, that's like a longer term thing. I have my beef with. I was very optimistic when Jerry Dipoto got hired. I'm a stats guy. He pretended to be a stats guy. I think
that's probably the best way of putting it. He pretended to be.
He appeased that part of the fan base to some degree. I don't love every acquisition he's made. Some of them seem like he will never be like a World Series GM. He'll never make. Houston wasn't like a destination. Tampa Bay's not a destination. Obviously, the Dodgers took like unlimited resources and guys who were incredible statistical minds, put it together, and now they're a perennial contender. And I don't know what you do about that. Those guys are, I mean, the Astros now aren't even a destination. It's just like they have a generation of depth in their farm system and major league roster. I don't know what you do. That's kind of like the Mariners lost. They lost 2023 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to spending money, even if you don't do it through free agency or expensive trade acquisitions, you can spend your money on international signings. You can spend your money on paying for guys you draft. There's different ways to spend money.
But you can only draft as many players as you have draft picks for.
But I'm saying
you can
there
pay
are guys
them.
who will fall down a draft board because they're going to be too expensive to sign. You're going to have to pay them more than what their slot in the draft says they're worth, right? Yeah. Those are guys that the Mariners might have to take chances on, or international guys that might cost too much. I mean, a few years ago, I'll give them credit. They made a huge international free agent push to sign Shohei Ohtani. we don't really know. I mean, the rumor was that the Mariners were second or third on his list behind the Angels, but they basically cleared all this international spending money space so that they had the finances to be able to bring him in if they were able to get him.
I said at the time that was the day that Jerry DiPoto got fired, and I don't know that I'm wrong. I think it's possible.
I mean, like what they did with that money instead was they paid for Julio Rodriguez. So they signed him out of international free agency instead of Shohei Ohtani. So they ended up still, I mean, that's a hell of a consolation prize,
that's
right?
True.
Like if we all looked at that year as the Ohtani sweepstakes, to come away with Julio Rodriguez out of that is pretty incredible.
But so yes, absolutely.
Right.
But you also got how many years of Ohtani performing at an elite level
before
Julio even made it to the majors.
And now the Mariners aren't even, I mean, the Mariners obviously think they have a shot to sign Ohtani this coming off season. But if any National Baseball expert would tell you, they have no shot. So the perception.
In fact, though, I will say, like with Japanese players, this is maybe the one place where the Mariners have some.
Right. The fact that Ichiro is still in that locker room every day.
I guess it's the one good thing about that asshole still taking batting practice every day is that maybe Shohei Ohtani will come. But I mean, part of what I heard when he came to the U.S. was that he wanted to play for a place that didn't have a legacy of Japanese stars.
Yeah.
And that might still be the case. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, the Mariners are especially conflicting because I do think the knock on them that they just don't spend as much money as they have is a fair one because they're always towards the top in profitability among teams. But for whatever reason, that money is not going back into the play on the field.
Sure.
It's just not. I don't know, like you said, whether you choose to do that through homegrown talent or through free agency, through trades, however it might be, you're not using those resources on improving the play on the field. And that's
my point is also you can't go spend $30 new million every year. A new $30 million every year. Like,
I mean, you can though in baseball. You can get away with it in baseball more than any other sport.
Well, so yeah, fine. Technically, there's no salary cap, whatever. But what I'm saying is like when you sign a guy to a 10-year, $300 million contract, his $30 million is there next year, and it's part of the budget next year.
Yeah.
If the argument is Major League Baseball teams can spend unlimited money, so they should. First off, wait to see what it does to ticket prices as the one thing I would say. Like it's going to make the games much more expensive to go to, all that stuff. Like baseball maybe has the most direct line between team spending and the cost to view the game.
Yes, but I would also argue that if they're winning, that's going to make ticket prices go up too.
True.
So it's like I do think that there are fans
That's a
out
really
there,
good point. That is a really good point.
Right, like regardless of how you spent your money, if they had the Oakland A's payroll and they're paying nobody, but they happen to make it to like the ALCS, the next year ticket prices are going to be a lot regardless.
But ultimately, my point is like these teams have budgets. Every team has a budget. They don't have limitless budgets. Even the Dodgers are trying not to spend a luxury tax. Like these teams do have budgets, and the team is profitable. Whatever. Here's the thing. It's not. Everyone will say the thing. It's not my money. That's fine. It doesn't make it limitless. It doesn't make spending irrationally. There's many deals like this Jacob deGrom deal that end in a player severely underperforming the money he was paid. Robinson Cano probably.
No, so this we can talk about Cano in just a second, but I do think that this stance is interesting based on what you said earlier when we were talking about PGA and the LIV Golf Tour and siding with basically owners over players. You know,
so for me, there's the biggest thing with this. The analogy is like when Griffey left.
Yeah,
people were mad at Griffey, and to me, we shouldn't have been mad at Griffey. Even though he did hurt my feelings, I was mad at him at the time. But as an adult who's now worked, like that guy needs to go make as much money as he can. But I don't root for outside of Griffey, outside of players that you love. I'm rooting for Laundry, man. Like I'm rooting for the team. I want the Mariners to be good.
I mean, okay. I would say that Griffey was a little bit different just because he wanted to go play closer to home. That was his whole thing.
Again, that's a labor thing, not a management thing, though. Like I relate to
that. Yeah, you can be mad at Griffey for that or whomever. I mean, no one even should really be mad at him. If that was the real intention behind wanting to go, then nothing you can do here is going to save that relationship.
Also, the trade brought in a player who was better than he was.
Yeah,
by WAR. immediately.
Right.
Plus Brett Tomko.
With Cano, I feel like the Cano one always gets a really bad rap because Cano was actually a very good player for the Mariners through the duration of that contract. He was. At the last year with the Mariners, he gets popped for steroids, and then the miraculous thing about that contract is that they were actually able to get rid of it. That is, if you ever want to point, like I know a lot of people will look at the different trades Jerry Dipoto has made and said these are all incredible. That's the biggest one.
If they traded Robinson Cano for nothing and the Mets took on his salary, that would have been a win.
Yeah, and
I know get star prospects out of it was insane.
Yeah, they basically bought the prospects by sending money to offset some of that contract, and that's fine. I feel like that's one instance where you have to spend the money and it's totally worthwhile. But people, I know after he went to New York and became a Met, his performance declined dramatically, and everybody says, oh, that would have happened here. And maybe it would have. But while he was a Mariner, he performed well. And that contract that they gave him, 10 years, $240 million or whatever it was, that's the going rate for a player of his stature. You see that all the time. I think
at the time it was more than the Yankees were. I think they had to overpay him for the time.
They did. And they'll always have to. I mean, and that's the same thing with this year. If they were going to go get one of these big name shortstops this past offseason in free agency, they were going to have to overpay them because you have to overpay them to make the travel worthwhile, to make being away from your family, this far away from your family worthwhile. All the things that we talked about, all those things, you're going to have to pay for that. And I don't know if the Mariners have just historically been, outside of Cano, been unwilling to do that, or maybe they are willing to do it and they just can't seal the deal for other reasons. I don't know, but they're never in on these guys, and that's a problem.
Well, and I think the thing too is they either made a tactical mistake or they know more than we do. Well, actually, that's absolutely
true. They definitely know more than we do. Yeah.
So they said at some point, J.P. Crawford is our shortstop. So what they might have known when they said that is we already know none of these shortstops are coming here. So we can, if we're going to get anything out of this, we can get some vote of confidence, buy-in, a cultural win for J.P. Crawford. And
yeah.
So that's because fine. And also
no, you're right.
But what I'm saying is like they may know that none of these guys are coming for a price that's reasonable long before that is the one caveat that I think we always have to give is there might not be an amount of money you could pay Carlos Correa to come to Seattle.
Exactly. I mean, I think that is a realistic thing that most fans are just never willing to accept.
The fact that he ends up in Minnesota, very insulting because I feel like it's a worse version.
It's got
the same problems
bigger
that Seattle
bugs.
Has. Yes.
Yeah. No, that is a reality. I mean, there are some guys that are just never going to come to Seattle. Even if they offered $1 billion, if they offered them live tour money, they're still not coming here. That's just a reality. And that's the case with any of us. I mean, think about your own situation. There are some companies out there you will never work for.
Sure.
Whatever your field is, whatever it is you do, maybe you work at Target and you will never work at Walmart. There's certain things like that.
And your criteria might be different than your coworkers.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, that's something that's always going to exist in a market like this, in a free market like baseball is.
Sure.
So that's a reality. I mean, I think, again, getting back to what I originally said, the Mariners are just complex because there's so much going on. I mean, the profitability, the profit margins that they have, it shows they always make money, and yet the money's not being recycled into the team often. Sometimes it is.
I will say I'm skeptical of these like profit reports because this is like a cash flow discussion where like the Yankees don't have to be cash flow positive to be profitable.
Right. We don't know what John Stanton's finances are. Just because the team is making money doesn't mean he has the money to spend it on players.
And also, like, the big thing about owning a team is not always cash flow positivity. It's appreciation and value.
Yeah. But
they might not be getting the same appreciation as the Yankees.
Totally. Yeah. Again, the complexity of this team extends farther. I mean, every time John Stanton and Jerry Dipoto get a chance to speak, it often doesn't go well.
Sure.
I guess maybe the marketing. I mean,
part of the thing is they're giving bad news a lot of the time.
Well, the way that they communicate is not great. I mean, Stanton tends to operate, every time he speaks, it comes from a guy who operates like a company CEO who's simply concerned about the profits, right? Like the way he talks, the language he uses, it makes it seem like he maybe doesn't care about winning as much as he cares about money, and that's going to reflect badly to fans. Jerry Dipoto, he is just one of those guys that wants to sound like the smartest guy in the room all the time.
Sure.
So again, he's going to say things a lot of times that don't resonate with the average fan, or he'll say things. A lot of times it feels like he talks when he doesn't even need to. Like, you don't need to say JP Crawford is your shortstop. You can tell JP Crawford that behind closed doors, but to say it out
saying
loud,
it publicly means more.
Saying it, well, it does to the player.
Yeah,
absolutely. But to the fans and to the people around the team and to the prospective free agents, they're all going to hear that and say, well, why would I want to go there?
Well, unless, again, because we don't know, unless he'd already been turned down by he'd already, been given a no-go from all of the agents of all the free agent shortstops.
Yeah.
And then it's like, at that point, you could either say nothing or you could try to benefit your team by making JP Crawford feel like you really believe in him.
Yeah. I mean, I would just... Man, the cultural aspect, the culture aspect that they've tried to create in Seattle with this organization since Dipoto has been here, it very much feels like we're a family company.
Sure.
Where it's like you're saying all the right things, but they're not reflecting amongst the people, the employees, right? So, they're just not reflecting amongst the employees for whatever reason. Is it you? Is it that the message comes across as disingenuous? Whatever it might be, it's just not resulting in what we want. Now, you could argue that last year's success at the major league level proves that it did work. The culture did work, and maybe that is the case. But it until you sustain that success, people aren't going to believe it. You have to sustain it.
Yeah, I think to me, my argument would be it doesn't matter how much money they spend until they have the right front office. And I'm fine with tearing the front office down. If that's the argument, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
If they're not doing a good enough job of acquiring players in any form, free agency trades, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with writing off the front office, even after the playoff year. That's unfortunate that it's got like they might have bought themselves a couple years. I always thought like Jack Zarenzik bought himself extra years by having one good season.
Yeah.
One unexpectedly good season. And even when I was on Team Russ and not Team Pete Carroll, I was like, it is like that championship has given him kind of like a lifetime pass.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because last week we were talking about how in the NBA, coaches and front office members get fired all the time.
Yeah.
Even with success. Jerry Dipoto has been with the Mariners since 2015. So this regime has been in place for 8 years now. And they've had one playoff run, and it was last year. It took till their 7th year to even get to the playoffs. And most franchise would have fired that guy.
Yeah.
He would have already been gone. So the fact that, I'm sure people will point and say like they've been successful. It's like, yeah, but should they have even gotten to that point? Like they should have torn this thing down prior to that. I mean, in baseball, you see these teams stick with their regimes much longer. So I get that. But it seems like the Mariners have always been willing to give the benefit of the doubt to that front office. And because it just historically has not paid off with this team, you have to doubt that it's working, right? Because it's never worked.
Last thing before we go to the home run game, very common thing that people will say, because what I think the Mariners have needed for 20 years is a rebuild. People will often say they've been rebuilding for 20 years. It's not true. They've never actually committed to a rebuild. Even when Jerry Dipoto came, he basically was like, I want to win now, and I have a 5-year plan. Trying to win now sacrifices that. It's why the 5-year plan became a 7-year plan. Why it delays this thing that will need to happen. You will need to acquire talent that is, especially by the way, because it's very difficult to get players to come here, you gotta have players you have leverage over. This sounds very anti-labor, by the way, but like Julio Rodriguez, they signed to this big deal because otherwise he's got to wait 5 years to sign a deal, and they're giving him essentially a market value contract right now. That's something you can do if you have leverage over these players. They've never done a full-scale rebuild. Jerry Dipoto never did. Jack Zarenzik never did. Bill Bavasi never did. Woody Woodward never did. Pat Gillick never did. Like, these are, I mean, maybe the Woody Woodward era they did on accident because they were so terrible for so long. They kept acquiring these high draft picks and converting them, which is something they've struggled on. But
So what you're saying is they need to at least consider a full-scale rebuild.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is like right now you're in this period of time where you have Julio signed for 13 years, which now becomes very similar to the Felix situation where you think you have a generational talent.
Yeah.
So you have to make some commitment to winning now. But what I think is the most likely thing to give the Mariners a championship is a full-scale rebuild and a half decade of talent acquisition and some reasonably high conversion rate, and I don't think Dipoto's the guy for that.
Well, I mean, the real issue is that as they had kind of rebuilt things, whether you want to call it a rebuild or not, as they built up their farm system over the last few years, they've now been taking all those assets and turning them into trades.
Sure.
Because they have to go get those guys that they can't get in free agency, so they have to make trade acquisitions. And while it's worked to mixed results, some of these guys that they bring in via trade have been very good, others have not. That's always just a risky play. You've done exactly what you wanted to. You've built this farm system up, but rather than gamble on those guys working for your organization, you're passing them off elsewhere for veterans who have a compressed window and that you're paying more money for. So it's just, they kind of talk out of both sides of their mouth when they built this thing up, and it doesn't look like it's working. So who knows what's next? Who knows, man?
Yeah. One thing before we get into this, I'm very conscious of. I have I've been fucking with my nose a bunch because it itches this whole podcast for some reason.
Cocaine.
Maybe allergic. Yeah, it's the cocaine. I might be slightly allergic to your dogs.
Oh, okay, that's possible.
But I just want to acknowledge for the listeners that decided to watch, thinking they could see you sweat. Perfectly cool in here, cool and quiet in this room.
I've got my AC vent right behind me, just blowing up my backside.
It's very nice. Great. It's nice in here.
It feels great.
Okay, home run game.
Okay,
I'm gonna give you the one. I'm gonna call him. I have a nickname for him on a different podcast of mine that I forgot about until I was thinking about doing this. It's Backwards Trevor, which
okay,
yeah, that's we're going to just call him Backwards Trevor for his own anonymity. He knows that I appreciate him, and this keeps his anonymity. There's no Trevor it's in reference to. You'll understand when I explain it to you, but Backwards Trevor is the name. He suggested Juan Gonzalez, who is not a former Mariner, but a guy who ruined the Mariners for years.
Big home run hitter. Man, he was good.
He played 17 seasons.
Yeah, he played a long time.
Starts with Texas, plays with Detroit in the year 2000, plays only one season in Cleveland, which is actually surprising to me because I seem to remember him and Albert Bell. I wonder if that's even true because it was 2001. Was Albert Bell an active Cleveland player at that time? I think I am completely full of shit.
No, I don't think he was at that. Bell was already with the Orioles, if not out of baseball.
So whatever was in my mind about Juan Gonzalez and Albert Bell being in the same lineup,
no,
completely. Albert Bell, by the way, very underrated player in the annals of baseball history.
Yeah, he was good too. Yeah, no, I feel like Juan Gonzalez is like he typifies the '90s, the steroid era of home runs. I'm not saying he was. I don't think he was ever even accused of steroids.
I think he might have been. I think he was one of the early
guys. He was a
big
guy.
Actually.
He was very muscular, hell of a hitter, underrated, I would say, in a lot of respects.
Yes.
Though you could argue that playing in Texas in those days made him underrated. They weren't a team with a spotlight on them by any means. He took the 1996 AL MVP away from our guy, from Alex Rodriguez. Everyone thought that should have been A-Rod's MVP season. He was only like 20 years old at the time, too, that year.
Yeah.
And they gave it to Juan Gonzalez instead. And a lot of people thought that was an injustice, but they both had great seasons. You couldn't go wrong with either guy.
It's tough in today's modern era to not acknowledge that the guy was a shortstop that was hitting like a elite first baseman.
Yeah. So, okay, you said he played 17 seasons. We'll say towards the end he probably wasn't as good, and maybe in the beginning only played partial.
Maybe. So can I tell you what Backwards Trevor said was going to happen when I bring this up? He said Juan Gonzalez, Alex is going to go through the process. He said he was way wrong on what he thought.
Okay.
And he's like, Alex is going to go through the process and stick it within 2. So that's your threshold.
Oh, there's no way. Sticking it within 2. Who does this guy think I am?
Yeah.
I think the closest I've ever gotten was 3, right?
Probably.
That was like a miracle.
Actually, I do want to, because he sent it to me. So we're going to figure out how to deal with the first 2 weeks. One of the options is to ignore them completely. But if we ignore them completely, you've been off by 356 total home runs, and I've been off by 494 home runs, which is actually a narrower gap than I thought.
Yeah.
After last week, and means that I can't remember what the exact difference was last week, but I might have been leading.
You were either leading or we were very close to being tied.
Right.
I think prior to last week, and then Wade Boggs just came around and kicked you right in the nuts.
Jose Cruz made love to your backside, and Wade Boggs made love to my backside, and you got the more attractive partner in that case. So don't look at this.
Yeah. Okay. So 17 years in the big leagues. He was putting up legit home run numbers in the 90s. So not those 25 home run seasons. He was 30 to 40, maybe even more in some seasons, but we'll say he averaged about 30 over 15 seasons. So 10 seasons, that'd be 300. 5 seasons, that'd be 150. So 450 home runs. I'm going to say, man, he might. I don't think he was a 500 home run guy, because I think he'd be in the Hall of Fame if he was. So,
I do think he has a steroid thing, though.
Okay, that could prevent. I mean, every hitter in the 90s is now like, we've all decided
Juan
to ostracize
Gonzalez
them.
steroids.
I mean, if there was ever a probably category, he'd definitely fall into the probably.
Hold on, wait. This is a great thing to do on a podcast. Stop talking, Alex. I need to. Juan Gonzalez steroids.
Yeah, you probably.
Yeah, stop talking. Never directly connected to performance-enhancing drugs. Okay.
Okay, yeah. But again, if there was a probably category, I don't know. He might have been just a weight room warrior. He was in great shape. I'm going to say he hit 465 home runs.
So you're not far off. The process, I do think, worked. You didn't stick it within 2. I'm sorry to say. If you had stuck it within 2, I'd have been pissed.
Yeah.
434 home runs.
Okay, I overshot it a little bit. Yeah.
So, yeah, I had so when Backwards Trevor said, he told me he was, I didn't want to give it away too much. He said he was surprised by the amount of home runs. I actually thought he was in the 500s, and I assumed he was in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Or had a steroid thing.
I thought he was approaching 500, which I guess he was.
I also thought he had a 50-plus home run season. He never did. He did lead the league in home runs twice, but with, I think, 43 and 46. He had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 40-plus home run seasons. And, I mean, just one of the great hitters of that time, one of the great power hitters of that time. But
those 90s numbers for guys that did not make the Hall are just going to, in retrospect, look so wild, because there's not going to be a lot of like 400 home run hitters in the modern era. I can't imagine.
You don't think so?
I don't think so, because I think just the quality of pitching they face is going, having a different reliever every single inning through the back end of each game. That's going to be tough to equal those numbers.
Who would even be like who's a guy like what?
Look up like Bryce Harper or somebody like that. He's probably got a lot, though.
Bryce Harper stats.
He's probably got a lot. I mean, there's certain guys that'll do it, but he's like one of the guys I would consider one of the premier power hitters of this generation. And okay, I'm gonna look him up here too.
All right.
And to think that, like, I don't know if he could ever even get to that number. He's 30 right now. He's got 288 career home runs, and he's 30.
I think he'll hit 400. I bet he'll hit 500.
But like Juan Gonzalez, he's one of many guys from that era that were over 400, right? But it's like if you're from the steroid era and you didn't hit 500, you're not an automatic Hall guy. So it was just a weird time.
I think we have. Oh no, good. It's not that bad. I knew there were slightly. I only had like 2.5 hours of time on this SD card. I was like, that'll be fine. We do a 90-minute podcast now.
We're gonna be very close. Okay, I've got a guy for you. It's funny because we reverse roles. Usually I give you like the big name former player, and you give me a former Mariner. Yeah. Today you gave me the big name former player, and I'm giving you a former Mariner. I don't know if this guy's going to be tough or easy. He only played for the Mariners for 2 seasons, but they were 2 of the bigger seasons, 96 and 97. He was a first baseman, power hitting lefty, big guy.
Yeah, I know who you're gonna say. Can I guess the name?
A big Italian man.
Yeah, that's yeah. Although I don't know that the other. It's one Paul Sorrento.
It is Paul Sorrento. Now I have to.
How many people could you go on a podcast and they would guess Paul Sorrento from very little information?
Not many.
Yeah, that's
Not
even
many.
Mariners fans. We are
We're degenerate Mariners fans. Okay, I got to see how he was acquired because I couldn't remember this.
I believe it was the Tino Martinez trade to New York.
No. Speaking of free agents, he was a free agent signing in 96. He came here because they traded Tino Martinez to New York.
He was Sorrento in New York before that?
No.
Okay.
He was with the Minnesota Twins, I believe. Yeah.
Did he have a stint with the Rays ever?
Yes. So he played the start of his career was with the Twins. Then he goes to Cleveland. So the Mariners actually acquire him after he beats the Mariners in the 95 ALCS as the first baseman for Cleveland. He plays a couple years here in Seattle, and then he finishes his career in Tampa Bay. Mm-hmm. So he ends up playing 11 years in the big leagues for those 4 teams that I mentioned. It's funny because he never had a 1-year stint with any team. He always played multiple seasons with each team he was with. I guess that means he was like a dependable or at least likable enough guy to bring back. Batted left, threw right, listed at 6'2", 195, which I would say that 195 was probably a rookie number. He seemed much bigger than that.
Couple meatballs.
He was just like
his career.
The prototypical like late 80s, early 90s thumping first baseman that you could never picture playing another position besides first base.
Yeah, back then first basemen were first basemen. For good or for bad.
It's interesting because with the Mariners he was only third base and DH. First base and DH, yeah. But when he goes to Tampa where he finishes his career, they actually play him in left field from time to time.
Oh wow, that's like what was the guy Scott Hatteberg that they play? I think
the catcher who's he's in Moneyball.
Yeah,
he's in Moneyball.
The
he plays
A's,
first base.
We should have a Moneyball discussion on it. This way too much for this, but I can't stand that movie. Believe it or not,
the movie I like the book, but the movie is not good.
Yeah, it won awards.
Yeah, because these people had no idea.
Thank you.
They don't care about historical accuracy.
Thank you. I've been shit on every time that movie comes up because I hate it.
When Bohemian Rhapsody got nominated for a bunch of awards.
Sure.
It's very historically inaccurate. So people who actually knew the story were upset about it.
And I loved it because I'm an ignorant fool when it comes to Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay. So 11 seasons. That's all you need to know. I'm going to let you venture a guess at Paul Sorrento's
Okay.
home
So I'm
runs.
going Paul Sorrento is a downgrade from Tino Martinez. I believe I'm going he is a guy who in full seasons was averaging 25 to 30 home runs. Probably a fair amount of doubles also. I think one of these guys that's a professional hitter. Obviously, you take the 11 years, you subtract a couple years from the end, from the beginning. I'm going to go 212 home runs.
That's not terrible. Okay. It's not terrible. Like me, you overshot it. 166.
Okay, that's
the
not
number.
It isn't terrible. My original thought was 180, but
you should have gone with that.
I know. Well, yes, obviously in retrospect.
The process again. This was one I was like, boy, it really just kind of depends where in the process you peg him for his average home run years. Yeah. Because that's why I was like, I'm not sure if this one will be hard or easy for you. His numbers, the first 3 seasons, his seasons in Minnesota, they just didn't play him.
Right.
So 89, 90, 91, 23, 24, 25 years old. They're really not giving him any playing time, but they were really good teams. That was like Minnesota's World Series caliber teams. Yeah. So they just didn't have room for him. So those first 3 seasons, he only had 9 home runs total. Then he goes to Cleveland in 92. Now he's becoming a full-time player. His home runs jumped dramatically. So he has back-to-back seasons of 18, then a 14 homer. Then he really kind of hits his stride in the mid-90s. He's 25, 23. I didn't remember this, but in 1997 with the Mariners, granted, their offense was insane in 97. So everyone was hitting 31 home runs for the Mariners in 97 and an OPS of 859. In 96, he hits fewer home runs, but his OPS was 878, which is the highest of his career. So he was actually a very productive first baseman for the Mariners. He was pretty good. And then, he goes on to Tampa for those final 2 years, and he still hits double digits both seasons. His career high in home runs is 31 with the Mariners in 97, but he was kind of always in it ranged from like the mid-teens to that peak of 31.
Yeah.
Volatile number. That's why he was never one of those guys that was like, I feel like a guy
Did he
like...
play in any All-Star games?
I don't think so.
Yeah, no All-Star games.
No.
Downgrade from Tino, but probably actually in those 2 years, not a huge downgrade from Tino.
No, I mean, those 2 years were two of the most productive years of his entire career with the Mariners. And granted, he was doing it in the Kingdom, which was a hitter's park, and he was doing it surrounded by a lineup of guys that were like Hall of Famers.
Yeah.
So that probably helped. I'm sure he was seeing a lot of good pitches. But bless you.
Thank you. We had to get one sneeze in to prove my point about my nose that I'm not doing cocaine.
Career OPS of 798. That's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah, he was a solid player.
I had this idea for a pod. Have you ever heard of that website? Like it's a blog, I think, called Hall of Very Good.
I have heard of it.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know even what it really is. I just think the name is amazing. And I think it would be a great name for a podcast where it's like guys like Paul Sorrento, where you're like, fuck, I forgot Paul Sorrento existed,
Yeah, and he was pretty good.
Yeah.
He was pretty good.
Okay. Yeah. One last thing before we end. I am conscious of this thing that I didn't prepare for. You're a shoes off house. I didn't wear socks today, and I just want to acknowledge
we're not really a shoes off house. Right. We just have carpeting everywhere.
You just wanted to make sure that I put my grimy bare feet.
And I'm just
under.
Comfortable.
Yes.
In my socks.
All right. Public apology. All right. To your wife more than you. All right.